Hi folks, and happy Space Week. It's Rob here with MTU Blackrock Castle Observatory, and we're going to be taking a look at the night sky for Space Week. So last year we had a look at the western sky over here, learned to identify the plough, and using the plough we did a little bit of what we call star hopping to jump along to other constellations and find other less known constellations nearby. If you want to review that video, it's still relevant for this year in terms of the stars. The planets and other objects may have moved, but the stars remain relevant. But this year we're going to use a different asterism to do the same thing. So you've probably already seen what I'm going to use here in the southern sky. These three stars here, Deneb, Altair and Vega, make up the summer triangle. And it's a really useful asterism for the constellations that we want to try find. So let's zoom in a bit further on that. Make it a little bit clearer by throwing up these asterism lines, so you can disregard some of those extra lines. It's just that main triangle here that we're interested in. That's your summer triangle. And we're going to identify each of the constellations within it. So we'll start with Altair down here. We'll zoom in a little bit on that and look for any stars that look like they may be connected. So the first two that are very obviously in a line next to that Altair are these guys here. So they're connected to each other in this constellation. You've probably seen that these stars along here seem like they're in a slightly kind of wiggly connected line. They almost look like, you know when a kid draws a kind of a V shape to signify a bird on a painting? Looks like that. And there's another line that's kind of visible coming down towards these stars down here as well. So let's throw up the constellation art to make it a little bit easier to see. And there you go, it's this kind of cross shape right here. Now don't worry too much if you can't pick out each individual star. It's more about getting the vibe and expanding your knowledge. You don't have to get absolutely everything right. If you even identify just Altair and the general vibe of this kind of shape here, you'll be doing really well for yourself. And what we're actually looking at is an eagle called Aquila. So he was supposedly the eagle that carried Zeus's thunderbolts for him. And to be fair, it actually does look quite bird-like. A lot of constellations tend to not look much like what they are reported to be, but this is one of those ones where I'm happy to say it does look a little bit like what it's supposed to be. Now, this next constellation we're going to be looking at is a parallelogram here. You can see these four look like a kind of a squished box, and they seem to be connected to this bright star here, Vega, as well. If you throw up the constellation lines, it almost looks like a musical instrument. This is like a really badly drawn guitar, where there's the body and the neck is formed from there to Vega. Well, it's actually a lyre. So the constellation is called Lyra, and we'll throw up the art there to see it. It doesn't look quite as much like it when you put up the art, but this lyre supposedly belonged to Orpheus. Orpheus was such a legendary player of the lyre that when his beloved Eurydice died, he followed her down to the underworld and played the lyre for Hades, the god of the underworld, and convinced him to allow Orpheus to bring Eurydice back to the real world. The only stipulation was that he wasn't allowed to look over his shoulder until they had departed. And of course he did look over his shoulder, and it all ended tragically. Very sad, but very famous story. And now the final constellation in the summer triangle that we mentioned is probably the easiest of them all to pick out. So you've got Deneb, that lovely bright star over there, and then you've got all of these stars here that make that that sort of easy squiggle of a bird that I mentioned for Aquila below is kind of replicated up here again. And then you've got a very obvious straight line between these four stars here. If we throw up the constellation art again, you can see this one is an even more prominent bird shape. And indeed, if you throw up the constellation art, it's Cygnus, or the swan. And it does look an awful lot like what it's supposed to like, which is very refreshing considering how many of the constellations don't look much like what they're supposed to look like. For instance, look at Vulpes down here. In what world is that a fox? It's, yeah, I'm sorry, that's terrible. Right, so I do want to point out one other constellation that I think is just cute. It's a lot of fun. I really like it. And if you come down to Altair here, you'll see this kind of strange looking mini diamond over here. And just off the mini diamond, there's one other star that looks connected to it in this sort of tail-like fashion. And that's Delphinus, the dolphin, which is one of the smallest constellations. I think it's really cute. It's a really fun one to add to the repertoire. And that's what this is all about. It's just building your knowledge year on year, adding 1 or 2 extra constellations into your list, and trying to find some that are a bit less well known. I think a lot of us know the Plough very easily. Some of us will know the zodiacal ones and Orion, but it's kind of fun to learn some new ones. So even if all you do is learn one more of these new ones, you're doing very, very well. Now, I will say I recommend that you go back and check out last year's video and see if you can spot those constellations as well. The other reason it might be helpful is some people might find it a little bit tricky to spot the summer triangle for the first time, whereas they're much more familiar with the Plough. Well, what you can do is use last year's video to get you all the way over to Ophiuchus over here. So what we did was we came in along the tail of Ursa Major over here into Bootes. From Bootes we went to the Corona Borealis and up to Hercules, and then from Hercules' elbow down to Serpens, and then from Serpens we went on over here to Ophiuchus, to the tail end of Serpens. And if you find your way back to the tail of Serpens, sure enough, that big bright star up there is Altair and the constellation Aquila. So you can use that to start your star hopping. So learn to find that one first, and from there you can jump up to Vega, and then from Vega you can jump up to Deneb and finding Cygnus and Delphinus. So that's a very simple bit of star hopping that you can do over there. And I would point out again that if you did learn how to identify the Corona Borealis last year, I highly recommend that you get out and spend a lot of time observing it this year. It's due to go, there is a star within the constellation that's due to go nova, and it's going to be visible to the naked eye for the first time in 80 years. And that's expected to happen pretty much any minute right now. So I'm recording this video on the 19th of September. There's a very good chance that this star will go nova any minute now. It may not even last until Space Week. So I highly recommend that you get out and get familiar with that constellation in the meantime, because it will make it much more obvious when you do see this new star. So it's going to be about as bright as Polaris is by all guesses. So Polaris is this one up here. So quite bright, one of the brighter ones in the sky, but not anywhere near as bright as Sirius. But it'll be hard to miss. Like it's going to be very obvious that there's a new star there, and that's a really cool and unique thing. This is one of those once in a lifetime opportunities. Now there is another potential once in a lifetime opportunity later in the week that I'm going to talk about in a moment at the end of the video. But I should point out 1 or 2 other items. So we are still on the 4th. If you're looking to the south, you'll be able to see the planet Saturn. If you look to the southeast, just put your fist out in front of you on the horizon. Saturn will be reasonably bright, sitting just above your thumb. So it's the furthest away planet that we can see with the naked eye, so it's not nearly as bright as Jupiter or some of the other planets, but with a bit of practice you'll learn to identify Saturn reasonably well. There aren't any other easy to see planets available at this time. I've set all of them to about 8:30, so that if anybody's going out with young kids, that we're not keeping them up at ridiculous hours. The only exception I would make to this rule is on the 10th of October, I would recommend letting them stay up a little bit later to maybe 10:30 and looking due east for this very, very bright, what looks like a star here, but it's actually Jupiter. The reason I think it would be cool to point that out is the Europa Clipper mission is due to launch on the 10th of October. So we're sending a spacecraft to check out the icy moons of Europa to see if they have the potential to host life. So this is Europa here. As we zoom in, we'll have a proper look at it. The Europa Clipper mission, as I said, is looking for signs of life in the oceans of Europa. I think it would be really, really cool to be able to point that out to a young person and say, hey, we've just launched a spacecraft at that planet and it's en route as we speak. So well worth waiting up for. And the final once in a lifetime opportunity that I mentioned earlier isn't quite once in a lifetime, but it is very rare, is we're expecting a comet to be visible. Now, we don't know just how visible yet. It may get kind of pummeled by the sun as it passes by. And it will probably be a little bit easier to see later than Space Week, so I will jump forward to the 13th here just to make it that little bit more obvious where it is. And we're going to make it a little bit darker so you can see it's really low on the horizon here. This is why I'm mentioning it as a sort of It's worth looking for, but it's going to be tricky. So don't beat yourself up if you can't see it, but it's definitely worth putting the effort in. So that smudge there is what's going to signify it as a comet. I can't really tell you how to star hop and find it because it wanders through the night sky. As I kind of jump back and forth here, you can see it's moving. It's not moving relative to the stars, it's kind of moving all of its own accord. So what you're really looking out for is that kind of smudginess low in the sky, and it's probably going to be at its easiest to see from the 13th according to the astronomy software here, but we really don't know with certainty yet exactly how it's going to look. We need to see how it interacts with the sun over the coming days. But do check out spaceweek.ie. If we get any update to indicate that it's going to be easier to see or harder to see, we'll be sure to let you know. But just worth flagging and preparing yourself. It will be in the west, it will be low down. It's worth putting a bit of thought and effort into. So I hope you'll get out and check out the night sky for Space Week. I do have one other request of you. If you do get out and have a look at the night sky, please tell us about it. So Space Week is the second most busy Space Week in the world per capita in Ireland, and we would like to get to that to number one. We think that the Irish people are uniquely motivated and interested in space. We have a very strong connection to the night sky through our dark sky parks, through people working in the space industry, and we have a rich heritage and culture and history of contributing to astronomy research. So I think there's something unique in the Irish culture that just links us to the stars, and it would be great to demonstrate that by being the number one space week in the world again in 2024. And the way we get there is by you telling us what you're up to for Space Week. So reach out to us on social media, email us at info@spaceweek.ie, or just post your own events on the Space Week website and tell us all about it. Whatever you do, look to the stars and have a great Space Week. Talk to you soon.